held a meeting with Finance Minister. The officials from the Pakistani side in this particular meeting also were the Governor State Bank of Pakistan and also the Chairman FBR. And according to the press release that was issued by the Finance Ministry, Finance Minister Ishaq Dar briefed the delegation about the fiscal policies and the economic reforms in various sectors to this delegation, and also said that Pakistan would complete its IMF program. Likewise, IMF Mission Chief Nathan Porter expressed confidence that Pakistan would fulfill all the requirements for completing the review, the 9th review regarding the extended fund facility of the IMF loan program for Pakistan. Now, the technical discussions with this delegation will continue till 3rd of February, and the second phase of the policy negotiations are to continue till 9th of February. There were certain other developments when we talk about the exchange rate. Pakistani rupee was appreciated 1.74 against the greenback today, and also the Pakistan Stock Exchanges rallied today. What sort of reasons are associated with this particular thing, the rally of the stock and the shares over there at PSX 100, and also the appreciation of rupee's value against the dollar? Let me bring in our panelists. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. He's former ambassador to the World Trade Organization. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that.
Thank you for the invitation.
And at the same time, we are being joined on Skype by Dr. Sajid Amin. He is Deputy Executive Director, Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Dr. Amin, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. Now, the IMF delegation is here. We'll definitely look into the importance of this particular meeting that was held between the delegation and the officials of the Pakistan side. Now, there are certain conditions which had been set by the IMF already for completing of this 9th review of the EFF. Now, when we talk about certain conditions that relate to the energy sectors and the measures to bridge the fiscal gap and also stabilize the exchange rate. So let's begin with the exchange rate. Today, Pakistani rupee appreciated against the dollar. What immediate reasons do you think were associated with this appreciation of rupee's value?
I think the market and everyone had a sigh of relief that the IMF mission is here. And the only reason IMF mission is here is because they had set up some preconditions. And the two key preconditions was, one, let this exchange rate find its market value and not artificially administered. And you know, and I think they were kind of satisfied. This has happened, so that's why they're here.
Right.
And I think the market reacted very positively. And the other thing, the other big thing was about subsidies being given to energy sector because of devaluation, etc. The prices had moved out, and Pakistan was still keeping it lower than the region, lower than the actual cost. So the market is it was done, and so the market is taking it as a good sign.
So are there other reasons associated with this appreciation of rupee's value? Of course, it is of key importance that the IMF delegation is finally over here for that pending review talks. Now, are there other reasons also associated with this immediate rise in rupee's value?
Basically, it's the IMF. The market is expecting that since they're here, and since both sides, I mean, IMF coming here, and our government already meeting those preconditions.
Right.
So the situation is good. So they expect that there will be some agreement.
Right. Let me bring in Dr. Sajid Amin also into the discussion. Dr. Amin, what key reasons do you associate with the appreciation of rupee's value today against the greenback?
Well, thank you. I think let's put this appreciation into the context, actually. I mean, it's good that rupee is adjusting, actually, but this is not an appreciation. Let's be sort of very clear on this one. Actually, rupee, since 23rd January or 24th January, since when the caps is removed in interbank and in the open market, rupee has depreciated by around 34, 35 rupees. So this appreciation is just a casual, I mean, it's sort of normal movement when rupee is trying to adjust around $278 So this is just a sort of a routine movement.
Well,
But this is not
that's
appreciation
a
that,
good
that
sign.
call,
That's a
but
good sign. Do you associate this appreciation value, although it is 1.74, it seems nominal as compared to the depreciation of the value of rupee after that price cap was removed. But this remains to be a good sign. Do you associate with the arrival of the IMF delegation to Pakistan?
of course. I mean, you know, one of the key panic that was in the market that we delayed going to IMF. We should have gone it too early, but this is good finally that IMF is there. Market now is having a positive sentiment because, you know, the discussions on defaults and many otherwise going in scenario that what if IMF does not come or what if ninth review is not completed. So that is a big positive news actually. And market is giving a positive response and rupee is adjusting to its value.
So when
I
we
think
talk
around
about
270. So that is why it's appreciating.
Right. So, Dr. Amin, when we talk about that particular cap which was imposed on the very exchange rate over PKR against the USD, did that had also anything to do with this one after it was removed? Was there any sort of an impact on the offloading of exports, also the incoming of remittances at the same time?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this cap has actually hurt Pakistan economy over the last 2-3 months. Actually, it created a black market for dollars. Remittances were not flowing through official channels. Now, when there is no sort of a significant gap between the open market and the interbank, so the remitters are now will be converging towards the official channels. Remittances will be picking up, exports will be picking up. But again, I would like to say this today's sort of appreciation of 1 rupee is just a routine adjustment because the impact of remittances and exports has yet to see. So it has two main sort of the indicators today's appreciation. One is the positive sentiments on IMF arrivals, and the other is that rupee is trying to adjust to its equilibrium around 270.
So Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, is this sort of an adjustment, is it a good sign for the coming days for the dollar exchange rate with the PKR?
Sure. I mean, you see the other one. The rupee was falling every day, and for the first time it's picked up. And obviously with this adjustment, now the remittance will start flowing back. And you know, we were already, if you compare last year to this year, we were losing. I mean, you know, it was down. And the other thing was, there's some estimates that the export proceeds of 6, 7, 8 billion, you know, it's, I don't know exact figure, were being kind of, the exporters were not bringing it back. And now they have every reason to bring it back. They realize that, you know, it's now on the market value. So those $6-7 billion coming back and the remittance going back to normal, and I think that will stabilize.
So the two other key reasons which are associated with this particular thing. So do you see more appreciation in the coming days, and especially the IMF delegation is over here, and this was one of those conditions, as you already mentioned, was set by the IMF for completing the review?
Frankly, such things are very difficult to guess, how things go, because the IMF, it will be first it will be technical discussions, then it will be the other discussion. So we would know around the 10th of February how the things have gone. Right. So the things will be clearer by then. But things are moving in the right direction.
So what about the shares? The PSX 100 also rallied
yes,
today.
Yes.
Is it because of the same
it's a good
reason?
reaction. It's a very good reaction. Right. That things are moving in the right direction.
Right.
Had they not come, things would have been much worse.
Right.
And everybody would be running, trying to find more dollars. And the rupee would be still further going down. But that has stopped because the market sees it moving in the positive direction.
Right. Dr. Amin, your take regarding the Pakistan Stock Exchange also rallied. Is it solely because of the IMF delegation's arrival to Pakistan?
Yes, I agree with Dr. Manzoor. I think one of the biggest driver behind the PSX is the positive sentiments, and this is all across the world, that your stock markets are very sensitive to the news which is coming. Generally, it is very, after 2-3 months, this is the first big major positive news coming to PSX in the stock market. So that is why I think this is behaving positively, and we will see more of it if once we go on track and IMF 9th review is completed positively. And I see more positive rally in the PSX because this is a good news coming.
Right. Dr. Amin, do you see the rupee value appreciating in the coming days also? Do you see this trend to continue?
I think this is very difficult to say, as Dr. Manzoor has said, but to me, even we would have sort of not reached to 270 if we haven't had put that sort of artificial cap on this one. Rupee may have stabilized around 260 if we have let it gradually adjust over the time. So this is always, when there is a free fall, it is a panic and it adds certain more rupees to the depreciation. So I think rupee will be gaining 2-3 rupees further. But as Dr. Manzoor said, it will depend on how IMF review goes, what is the political stability happening, and how exporters are behaving. Are they bringing back their holdings abroad, actually? But I think I agree with Dr. Manzoor that as rupee is sort of stabilizing around 269, 270, this is a news for exporters as well, that this is time to bring their dollars back.
Right. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, let's talk about the energy sector. So there were certain conditions which were set in that sector also. Could you shed a little bit of light regarding that? Pakistan most recently the authorities have increased the petrol prices also. So does that actually cater to the very demand of the IMF regarding the measures which are required to be taken in the energy sector also?
Yeah, partially. It does. You see, that was the primary condition, that you have to bring your prices to the market. But then there are a lot of other linkages with this price of crude oil or petroleum, etc., because then the secondary product is electricity and other things. So maybe over the next week or 10 days, they'll be talking about that. They'll be talking about circular debt of energy sector, because there was a lot of slippage. What Pakistan had committed, that they'll keep, this circular debt to a certain level and all those related things. And there'll be discussion about that. But at least the first step has been taken.
So what are the hurdles regarding that particular, when we talk about the circular debt?
Circular debt is very complex. It's not one thing.
Does it have to deal with the line losses or the theft thing?
That's one thing. Line loss is one thing. And then collection of bills, let me put it this way. There are some certain sensitive areas, like in FATA, no one pays for it. In some areas of you can see these discos in various areas, and many sensitive areas or more deprived areas, they don't really pay due.
So whatever the challenges are there when it comes to overcoming the circular debt, so what measures do you suggest should be taken in that regard?
I think they have to be maybe the best thing they could have done is allow these collections, etc., to the provinces. They are at their place, so they can assert more control. They, provincial police, etc., that's under them. So that would be the best thing to do. Discuss with the provinces, ask them to collect the taxes, because they know how much tax it is going, how much is, and how much everything is documented. So there's nothing going underneath, so some like Faisalabad, like Islamabad, etc., are almost collecting 90-95%, and others are not even collecting 60%. So they know where it's leakage, but it's very difficult for the federal government to go and do that.
Right. Dr. Amin, your take regarding this, when we talk about the circular debt, do you agree that it should be devolved to the provincial level so that they could exert more authority wherever there are sensitivities when it comes to collection?
I think, of course, but this may be a long-term process, medium to long-term process. Immediately, it seems not possible because Pakistan right now is struggling day to day, fighting to meet the the IMF conditions. But just one point on Dr. Manzoor, which has very rightly pointed that distribution is very important issue, and collection of the revenues and the bills. But I think one of the most factor behind the circular debt in Pakistan was high production costs, actually. Until and unless we have production efficient, circular debt will keep rising, actually, and I don't see any very sort of sustainable solution in the near future. I think right now the government is only left with raising these energy prices to cut this circular debt down, because sort of eliminating those inefficiencies of production and distributions will take time, and that we don't have right now. So I think right now the pressure on the government and the main instrument will be raising energy prices, and so to sort of cut those circular debts, but it will keep rising.
So, Dr. Amin, if there is no solution in the immediate sight, what sort of a solution do you think could be done in a through a transitory sort of measure, and what that could be possibly when it comes to reducing those costs associated with this particular thing?
Can you explain what do you mean by transitory sort of?
I mean,
really
going
don't get this
towards the
question.
other sources of energy rather than relying
exactly.
on the fossil
But
fuels?
that is a long term. Yeah, this is a long term. I mean, I think one of the biggest shock to Pakistan economy has always been the oil price shocks, because our reliance on oil imports, energy production is very high. So whenever there is a high rise in energy prices, global oil prices, Pakistan always have a very severe sort of balance of payment crisis, or it faces problems on this front actually. So changing the energy mix, actually moving towards renewable energy, green energy, so that is a sustainable solution. But as I said, this is a medium to long term solution. Right now, it is the immediate steps, and I still again reiterate that government has only option, and which is what IMF is pushing, also cutting the energy subsidies down and increasing the energy prices actually.
So is there any solution in the midterm also?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when we say medium to long term, it is you sort of correct your inefficiencies of distribution, you correct your inefficiencies of the line losses, you correct the theft and other things, engage provinces more in terms of revenue collections, bills collection, what we call, and then also gradually sort of cut your energy efficiency, production efficiencies down. I mean, so these are all medium to long term solutions. And I think government is working. We're really happy to see a very much good focus on green energy transition in Pakistan. And I think this is the only sustainable solution that the world is moving towards.
So when we shift from fossil fuels towards any renewable energy source, what prime source do you think could be that one that could help alleviate this particular thing?
I think right now, I really don't know what could be the exact one very perfect solution.
I mean, is it solarization more efficient, or do we have to go for the hydel power, or do we have to go for nuclear energy also? So, or is it going to be the mix of all these?
To be honest, I'm not an energy specialist, but what I've been reading and what I've been sort of working on with a couple of colleagues is that hydel remains the first priority. But right now, if we see, and of course, you know, the hydel engages its politics. It has a political economy to make this dam or not to make this dam. There are political economy questions, and these are very fundamental questions that we are struggling with over the last 30-40 years, actually. But I think the one good trend that we see is the solarization. The solar panels, actually, the solar that we are having at a household level, there is increasing demand as well going on. So I think this is a good trend, and we should build on this one. And for this, we have to create an ecosystem, actually, accessible finance, which right now may be very difficult to get with this 17% interest rate, which is a policy rate. And of course, there is upper when it goes to additional, when it goes to the household. So this is also creating some difficulties. So I think we have to have a ecosystem to support this transition. But the good part is that now there is a discussion on this, that ultimately Pakistan has to have energy security if it has to have economic security.
So do I understand from your take that in order to overcome the circular debt, a diversification of the energy mix in the longer run is of significant importance? Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a global practice, actually. It's global, worldwide. We have to cut our production inefficiencies by changing the mix, actually. I think this will be a good solution.
Right, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, your take regarding going towards the renewables, and that might have an impact on reducing the circular debt burden.
You see, the problem is going towards renewable is unfortunate. That's the only way. I mean, we have to go there, but it's still a long term. You know, talking about hydroelectric, any dam, you know, it takes 6 to 8 years, 5 years, 7 years, the very minimum. And the other, but fortunately, this especially the solar energy, the prices have really come down, and the trend is catching up in Pakistan. That, you know, more and more people are getting this. So that might make a difference. But we are starting from a very low base, so it's going to take some time. For the time being, I think what the government could do is that this about especially maybe about petroleum. There's one part, but about the gas sector, this circular debt is also now climbing, and they have to, because previously they were relying on the domestic gas that was discovered many years ago. It was very cheap. Now LNG has been imported, and the international prices went up, so the price up. So somehow they have to bring the two together.
How could that be done?
Oh, that can be done. The government can discuss it. It's a problem between various provinces, because where it's coming, say in Sindh, etc., it's coming. So they are reluctant to do it. But this could be negotiated. This is a national problem. So maybe it could be brought up about same level. Maybe they could be compensated elsewhere.
So could that be also an option, looking for other avenues such as importing gas from Russia also? We recently have seen negotiations in that regard also happening.
Russia, okay, you try to get the best, and Russia also tries to get the best price, so, whatever, so they're trying. But that will depend on international prices, okay? Fortunately, this winter in Europe was a little warmer, so the price didn't really, because Europe is now reducing its reliance on Russian gas. So they could buy from our traditional source was Qatar and these countries. So this prices was really moving up. So fortunately, I think that has stabilized. So that is one area. The other area is that we should not give this unnecessary subsidies. For example, the current government, even the very first thing Mr. Dar decided is to give 100 billion to exporters on energy subsidies. These things, impulsive things, should be avoided.
I mean, there is a condition by the IMF for the completion of this review regarding this subsidy that you have just mentioned.
Yes.
So don't you think it would have an impact on the exports? The Pakistan so looks forward to increasing its export base also?
Yeah, but yes, it is. But on the other hand, if we are not competitive in something, if we have to import cotton from somewhere else, and give subsidized energy and then export it, it's not value addition. It's negative value added. You're importing something, giving subsidized energy, and then exporting yarn, etc. Then you look for something else. You don't have to go that way. But the government decided to do that way, and I don't think that was the right way.
Right. Dr. Amin, do you see this particular take with the same lens as Dr. Manzoor Ahmad has said, that this particular subsidy to the export sector, because Pakistan looks forward to increasing its export base at the same time, don't you think if we withdraw this particular subsidy, it's going to be detrimental to the export sector?
I think, of course, this will increase the cost of production of the export sector. But I think one of the compensation that may be there, and maybe our private sector need to come up with and how to build on this, that is the exchange rate depreciation, actually. I mean, if on the one side, removing subsidy is sort of pushing up cost of production or lowering down the competitiveness, the depreciation may be a tool to sort of improve the external competitiveness, actually. So, but unfortunately, the export sector in Pakistan has been sort of driven by the subsidies. And of course, in the short run and immediate run, this will hurt the competitiveness. But we have to do, because the cost of not doing it is much higher than the cost of doing it, actually. I mean, the cost of removing subsidies may be higher, but this is even higher if we don't remove those subsidies, because at the stake is IMF program. So right now, I think Pakistan and the government is looking just to complete the IMF review, because the loss in the otherwise scenario is bigger than all these scenarios that we are discussing. But I will leave just one point, I think, which will be major challenge for Pakistan. When I was reading the title of your program and I was discussing that, to me, the biggest challenge that coming from all these measures is the inflationary pressure on the public at large. That, I think, will remain the big challenge, that how to compensate the general public, the poor of this country, through from the adverse impacts of these very tight monetary policy, very tight fiscal policies, which are putting inflationary pressures, removing subsidies from energy, raising taxes, raising tariffs, bringing mini budget, letting rupee depreciate. These are much needed sort of the steps to engage IMF and to complete ninth review. But the other side is there that it will have a very high inflationary pressure. And I think this is a point where government is facing a big challenge. What plan does it have to compensate the public at large, to protect it from significantly, substantially from these inflationary pressures?
So, Dr. Amin, what middle path do you suggest to the government authorities at the same time keeping and fulfilling all those requirements which have been set by the IMF, and also, of course, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had a clear vision that the public shouldn't be burdened, but of course some tough decisions have to be made in that regard. So how to strike that very balance and find that middle path in order to fulfill all those conditions at the same time keeping the public also not so much under that much of burden?
I think this is a very important question, and my colleague Dr. Manzoor, with his all experience, may bring more onto it. But let me just give one sort of a message to government as well. I mean, be it any government. Right now it is a sitting PDM government, but it can be any government. That whenever we do politics on economy, we are hurt actually. We hurt economy and we hurt people. I think the middle path, much of it we have lost. The delayed program on the IMF, the delayed engagement with IMF, not letting rupee adjust. I mean, imagine.
I mean, there were certain conditions which had been agreed by the previous government. That's what the current government authorities say. It was because of the wrong policies and backtracking from all those agreements which were already done with the IMF. The state of economy reached to this particular level of difficulty.
No, I do agree. I mean, I've been writing.
At the same time, the government had been giving the idea of charter of economy also. So as you just mentioned, that the economy, which actually pertains to every single common man, it shouldn't be politicized, and a larger interest of the nation should be taken into account. So what happens to be the responsibility not only of the government authorities but also of all the political stakeholders when it comes to forming a consensus and at least evolving or chalking out a consensus agenda which the government authorities had been saying in the form of charter of economy?
No, I think I agree, but I'll come on the charter of economy, but just let me give on this what actually I meant when I was speaking on the delayed movement. It's not only this government, actually. This is what I started with. It's every government delayed going to IMF. I mean, if you see the previous outgoing government, the petrol price freezing of March was actually, it brought a very discredit on Pakistan as a state to engage with the multilaterals. And that distrust is actually pushing IMF for harder conditions, actually. I mean, but I was saying that even over the last 2-3 months, if we had let rupee adjust gradually, it would have not that panic in the market. Coming to your question on what is the balanced approach, I think right now the government has to take two measures. I mean, it has work on two sides. Number one, it has to meet economic conditions of the IMF, but at the same time, it has to use social protection, social safety nets, targeted relief measures, like it has been doing on the Sasta, petrol, and other utility stores to protect the public at large from these adverse impacts, actually. And right. I think one of the key role is from the State Bank of Pakistan as well. It has to deliver on low and stable prices, inflation, because it still has not been able to deliver on the low inflation expectations and low inflation. I think this is a very important role that is not being discussed. Finally, just on charter of economy, I have been very clearly speaking on it, that while there is very serious political divide right now, but around 8 to 9 parties are in the ruling government this time. At least they themselves agree that going forward, they will not do any politics on economy. I think this can be a good beginning of the charter of economy going forward, actually.
Right. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, how the government can strike that very balance, fulfilling all those requirements by the IMF or of that very much needed IMF program, revival of it, and not burdening the masses at the same time. So how, what possible suggestions do you have?
I think Sajid has explained it well. It's a difficult situation. You know, you're between a rock and a hard place, but you have to have some balance. But you know, some subsidies, like under the SAS program or benefit income program, they're for the very, very poor. So, you know, I don't think either of us would have any serious problem with those. Though those people are with high inflation, etc., they're being really crushed. So that should stay. But then there are these subsidies for, these other hugely rich, maybe on whatever pretext. And also these state-owned enterprises. Why keep this Pakistan Steel and why keep this PIA and why keep all this? I mean, the government has to take, we have this Roosevelt Hotel there. Every year we are paying so many hundreds of millions. And also, for this, in this difficult time, all the stakeholders have to contribute. They have to say no to certain things. Just last week, they said, okay, we are giving so many billions for uplifting of the Supreme Court building. Maybe that could happen 2 years later. Maybe, other things that we are doing, all these things, this can wait 2-3 years. So all the stakeholders, whether it's defense, whether it's judiciary, whether it's civil government, they should all contribute. And only then it will work.
So do you think when the negotiations proceed after the IMF delegation is over here, don't you think the IMF delegation officials would have that kind of an understanding about the difficulties by the common man at the very grassroots level who are not from very affluent economic who don't carry that very privilege of having a good economy in their hands. So don't you think there should be a realization among them also, especially when we talk about the recent devastating floods also? So there was an expectation, as the international community has been responding to it very well. So there was an expectation on the part of Pakistani authorities that the IMF is also going to take that particular factor into consideration. So don't you think it should be done on their part also?
Yes, I agree. I think that should be taken into consideration. And I'm sure they're going to take that into consideration. In the recent Geneva meeting, maybe the government of Pakistan, the very best expectation they had is maybe $8 billion, some commitment, and it far exceeded that. So there is a realization that those
among the international community, when it comes to international organizations such as IMF.
IMF is what is IMF? This is all these countries combined together, there. So they have their board of directors. They also see this, and I'm sure. But I don't think they're really pushing for us to take any measures, to further hurt them. I think that is agreed. That would not be a problem. It is that they, for example, petroleum subsidy. They think that almost 70-80% of these go to very rich, these big vehicles and cars, etc. So those are the kind of subsidies are for the SOEs or for these subsidies. Most of these subsidies are going to these, and they want to cut down those subsidies.
Right. Dr. Amin, your take regarding when we talk about the expectation for Pakistani authorities, especially in the wake of the devastating floods we've had and they rattled the economy to the core also. So there should have been a realization and understanding on the, as far as the compassion and empathy is concerned when it comes to the IMF dealing and approving and coming into talks for the 9th review with Pakistan. Do you think there is a realization among those ranks, or if it is not, so what could be done? Because if the common people are going to be burdened and the government is going to continue to have tough measures, so it's going to have, and this has been talked about by Prime Minister himself also. So the international community at one time we have seen has responded well to the calls of the Pakistani authorities, and they were seconded by the United Nations Secretary General as well. So why not that sort of an understanding when we talk about the IMF dealing regarding the revival of this program?
I think there is a realization, and generally speaking, that IMF is not asking not to give any targeted subsidies like Dr. Manzoor said. What IMF is asking is to avoid the blanket subsidies that has been very prevalent in Pakistan. And I think this is where IMF is right. We need to cut those blanket subsidies which mostly go to the rich. And the targeted subsidies IMF is okay with, and it has been asking that any measures or any spending on social protection or social safety nets, which is targeted, may not be counted towards your deficit rates. But I think the one challenge with the government of Pakistan is to bring an action plan for those targeted subsidies, that this is how we are going to subsidize this proportion, and this will not affect the primary deficit or other targets. Actually, this is, I think, the challenge that the government of Pakistan is having right now, and they need to come up with the plan. I am sure that they do have plan this time when they go engage with the IMF. But I think the choice for IMF is also very difficult. On one side, it is a very high risk of economy going into the downslide. So first priority, I think, will remain the stabilization. And second priority will be not hurting the common public. But that, I think, is major responsibility of the government of Pakistan to come up with the alternative sources, alternative plans, and convince IMF that if we are spending this amount on the targeted subsidies, we will be covering it up from these sources. But just one step, I mean, the one point on the last question I was that what can be done. I think one area which can substantially sort of reduce the impact on the common man from these inflationary impacts is uh, one thing I think I've been sort of which is lacking is the control on prices actually, the hoarding, the over profiteering. I don't see any active engaging price control committees working in the provinces. And I think this is where will be the role of provinces is very critical. It's not only the responsibility of the federal government to protect all this and do every measures. I think the role in terms of over profiteering, hoarding, smuggling, so the provinces has a very active role, and I see, and I've been writing on this one, that if we can engage price control committees at district levels and even cut a 50% of over profiteering and hoarding, it can substantially bring the prices down actually of at least the basic necessities of life which a common man consumes. So this will be very important to see how provinces come on these measures to actively engage price control committees on these measures. But overall, the government of Pakistan has to come up with an action plan for targeted subsidies and convince IMF. But on the technical ground, I do agree with, and I've been writing on this one, that Pakistan need to have a very strong case to IMF that the targets, those who have been set before flood, which has really erased around 12 to 15% of Pakistan's GDP of 2022, needs to be revisited. But I think where we are failing is bringing in alternative plans, and the delay to go to IMF program is now pushing very urgent measures, and that is why we are finding these measures very hard. And my last comment on the commitments actually is that it is yet long to see these pledges converting into the real financing. We have had in the pledges in the 2010 floods actually, but most of it didn't realize. So I think this loss and fund that has been established, where Pakistan has been the champion, and very rightly so, and this has been really appreciated by the community. But I think the true fruits of it on ground will take a time actually, that pledges are very slow to convert into the flow of those financings.
Right, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, let's talk about increasing the tax base. How crucial is when it comes to the revival of this IMF program?
It is very crucial, but it's at the same time it's a very difficult area, because IMF or anybody says, look, I mean, you have 20% agriculture of your GDP, you have 60% of your GDP is services, and you hardly get any taxes from there. But it's been extremely, extremely difficult, whatever government has tried. But maybe eventually they have to do something in that, because all the tax burden is two sources. Either you're getting it from the industry or you're getting it from your international trade. And because of that, your international trade is stuck up unless you improve your international trade. And because of putting, for example, there's some news in the newspapers that there's going to be a flood surcharge. And now if they put 5% or whatever across the board, and if they put this surcharge on, say, pulses and edible oil and tea, etc., this is going to really affect poor section of society, because they cannot afford, because they're spending a lot of their earning on food products. So they have to somehow see that people living in big palaces, etc., pay more, and poor are spared this. And unfortunately, the easiest way normally the government finds is put more taxes on imports, and that across the board, and that really hurts the poor.
Right, Dr. Sajid, Amin, your take regarding increasing the tax base. What measures do you suggest could be taken when it comes to, if it is directly related to, because it was one of the conditions by the IMF for the revival of the IMF program. So there was a shortfall as per the FBR's assessment. So the target which has been given by IMF remains to be 7,470 billion rupees. So during today's discussions, this was also discussed. So how crucial that one happens to be and how this particular shortfall could be overcome.
I think it's very difficult to do this tax-based situation in the very next 3 to 6 months. We haven't been able to solve it over the 7 decades. It cannot be solved in 3 to 4 months, actually. So to me, expanding the tax base, particularly when economy is slowing down, we are having one of the severest stagflation, with economy maybe growing around 1 to 2% and inflation on the peak 25 to 30%. This is a very difficult question and very difficult task. I think 2 major sources that government will be focusing on this time. The number one is the spending efficiencies, which Dr. Manzoor also pointed towards. We have to reprioritize our spending. All the PSDPs, which are unproductive spendings, allocations to parliamentarians, they need to be stopped. They can be stopped. They can be channelized towards social protection. They can be channelized towards social safety nets, protecting the public at large. So spending priorities and spending efficiency, I see a major tool in next 3 to 4 months instead of solving this tax-based problem, which we couldn't do in the 7 decades, number one. Number two, I think to some extent, when we are letting rupee drop, this will also contribute positively in a very technical sense, not in a developmental sense, but in a positively sense that the growth in revenues may come because of a dollar rupees depreciation. So the earnings from imports, which is in the dollar terms, may remain a bit lower, but in rupees terms, they will be showing a bit larger amounts, absolute amounts. So I think it will be another source where FBR will be pushing on its revenues through sort of the exchange rate appreciation. But overall spending efficiencies I see, and otherwise we have to go on the new tariffs, the new taxes, and we are hoping a mini budget coming. And I think one of the key there will be taxation in terms of revenue collections measures, but we are really pushing, or we are really proposing that government should also give equal importance, rather I think more importance to its spending priorities, where to spend with more efficiencies. That will be critical to protect people at the same time and narrow down these deficits.
Right.
Because we have to have build on available resources in next 3 to 4 months. This is very difficult to bring new revenue sources or new stream of sources.
Right, Dr. Amin, the other day, a couple of days before, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, while inaugurating the Green Line, during his address, he said that we should outsource the services, and it happens to be of crucial importance. Now, when we talk about the state-owned enterprises, so in order to improve the performance, so what does this particular outsourcing means for the common man? How do we understand, and how does it operate, and how does it happen to be happens to contribute efficiently?
I think I have a more qualified man to respond to this question in terms of how it can be done and how to do it actually. Dr. Manzoor is there. But I think one of the key problems that we have been facing is in the privatization, that every government, every political party, when in government, supports privatization, but when the same party is in the opposition, it sort of opposes the privatization. And this is one of the key question on the political economy question in terms of privatization. In terms of outsourcing, I think one of the key driver that I think is the private sector. And even if we start from your question on energy efficiencies, cutting the circular debts down, improving solarization, the role of private sector is very critical. And I think we have to go let these SOEs go to the private sector. But unfortunately, I think Dr. Manzoor can add on it further actually, but unfortunately the way we have been doing privatization, I think it was not efficiency seeking actually. It was just to collect some revenues for one time, cut your deficits or meet your deficit targets and done. we need, I think, to reprioritize our approach and concept of privatization as well. If we really want to these SOEs to convert towards an efficient organizations, efficient entities, we have to think it from an efficiency lens and not only the revenue lens, which is right now the focus.
Right, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, your take regarding this.
Yes, slight difference with Dr. Sajid. I mean, in general, I agreed with him, but our experience with whatever we privatized, no matter what the propaganda, PTCL was privatized, maybe given to UAE, but the service is improved tremendously. Still, the government has most of the shares, but still, Karachi Electric, you know, compared to the other parts of the country, the serious studies show that they've done much better. They got much less subsidies, and they've done much better. So, and the banks we privatized, and previously they were all going bankrupt. The government had to, was trying to put in some money. Now they all are profitable, and profitable means that 35–40% of their profits come as taxes, and the government still maintains those shares. So, irrespective of all the propaganda, I think the privatized sector of the government has so far done well.
Right. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, former ambassador to the World Trade Organization, thank you very much for your time, for being with us at Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And on Skype, we were joined by Dr. Sajid Amin, Deputy Executive Director, Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Dr. Sajid Amin, thank you very much for your time, also for being
Can I have just one sentence?
Please go ahead. Please quickly.
Yeah, exactly. This was not a disagreement, actually, Dr. Manzoor. I was really saying the same. Just I was asking that we need to do it more. I am for the privatization.
Dr. Sajid Amin, thank you very much for your take and your time also. We really appreciate that. And with that, we come to the end of today's Views on News. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.